Hello and welcome back to Live with Lighthouse. This is the show where we guide you to the technology and talent solutions to drive your business forward. And I'm really excited to be back this week. I'm your host, Joe Ray, and I've really enjoyed a lot of the cybersecurity related conversations that we've had over the last couple of weeks here. And we're continuing that this week with a great friend of ours from throughout the Buffalo tech community. She is the founder and CEO of Second Derivative, and I'm going to bring her on stage right now, Renita DiStefano. Renita, hey. Thanks so much for joining us on Live with Lighthouse this week.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me on Live with Lighthouse. As we were talking about a minute ago, you guys have been focusing on cybersecurity and various topics around cybersecurity. So I feel like, continuous improvement in the cybersecurity space is really just kind of an exclamation point on some of those conversations. So thanks for having me.
Of course, and so excited to get into that too, and just processes that can help businesses as well. Could you start off maybe just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself and your work and your community?
Sure. Thanks. I've been working in IT for officially for like 25 years, unofficially for about 30. But half of that time was focused specifically on cybersecurity, information security, and assurance as well. So, a lot of the work that I've been doing recently has been because the credentials that I have and the expertise that I have in cybersecurity is in really high demand right now. So that's a lot of the work that I've been doing, but as well as, knowledge sharing and information sharing. So thanks for having me. This fits right into, that aspect of my work, which is, sharing the love around cybersecurity. Most recently, like within the last, just a little more than a year ago, I founded my own advisory practice, and I have, excuse me, some of a scrappy startup now, if you will, and that's been really fun.
Yeah, that's an exciting time too, to start something new, but also to be consulting. And we were talking a little bit before the show about just some of the traveling that you've been able to do and speaking to different tribal communities across the United States. Really incredible. So, wanted to talk to you a little bit there about some of the opportunities that consulting and sharing your cybersecurity and IT knowledge with those communities. What's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, there's a real talent deficit, certainly nationally, right? But definitely within the tribal space for cybersecurity expertise and professionals, right? It's really an area that I've been focusing on being an advocate for, more like an evangelist for, helping and promoting and recruiting people to come and do, cybersecurity work, because there's really just a need there. And so in part and parcel of that, part of my career right now has been doing, training and master classes and teaching in the regulator space and just in the tribal space. So I've been, in Connecticut, Oklahoma, Arizona. I mean, I've been all over the country in the last few weeks, and heading to New Orleans in just a couple of weeks. So it's been fun.
Incredible. Love it. So many opportunities right there. And one thing too, we're talking about accelerating the knowledge in these communities too. So the name Second Derivative of your consultancy, what was the inspiration behind that name?
Yeah, so Second Derivative, the name comes from, I'm a little bit of a math nerd, so fun fact about me, I love math. It's a physics term or a mathematics term. The second derivative of position or where you are is acceleration. And so that's where the name of the company came from, is because I feel like, that's my sweet spot, is bringing accelerators to the table, because, if you've lived it long enough, what the gotchas are, and how to skip past the mistakes and get right to the good stuff.
Yeah, and very excited for our conversation today about accelerating those business processes, and specifically through the lens of continuous improvement. So really looking forward to our discussion right here. And thanks to everyone who's tuning in live with us on LinkedIn. And feel free to share your questions in the comments if you have any questions based on our discussion, and we'll be glad to bring those up as well.
It's a great opportunity because, as I mentioned a little bit ago, this is something that's top of mind for everyone, right? And continuous improvement in cybersecurity requires, that proactive, adaptive, iterative, and evolving approach to, integrating those principles into the work that you do. It's just really required to be able to, I guess, stay ahead of the bad guys and keep up with the evolving threats that are out there. And just from a personality standpoint, I know this about myself, is that I am prone to continuous improvement mindset. I think it's just part of my personality. And so that's lucky for me, that it just sort of in my DNA. But, you can train your brain, if you will, to think in a mindset of continuous improvement just by putting simple procedures in place. Like, for example, on the way to work, you think about, of course, you're paying attention in driving, but on your way to work, you think about a process or a procedure that you've lived for some amount of time, maybe a year or 6 months or something, and you think about what you can do to improve that. And again, it's really necessary in the cybersecurity space because of the evolving landscape that's out there and the threats that we're facing. Step number one is just recognizing an opportunity to make something better, and then planning for that change. So you make a plan to make that change. And a lot of times I think about it in the sense that, because I'm also at the end of the process or that cycle, I think about measuring the impact, right? So were we able to, decrease our incident response time? Were we able to, address the threat or vulnerability, faster, better, more efficient? Did we increase visibility or transparency in the process? And so I think about the measurement part of it. So when I think about that, I like to introduce a change. You can make tiny changes or you can make sweeping changes, right? But if you introduce, even the tiniest of changes, you can measure that. For example, if you start on September 1, which is your fiscal year, you can measure that, or you can, start in January 1, which is a calendar year. You can measure that impact over time. So that's something that's, really important to me. But, identifying a change or an opportunity that you want to make and then making a plan for it. I like to make it time bound, as I mentioned, but then you live the change for a while. And, once you've lived it for a while, then you can study the results and do kind of a keep or toss exercise, right? Was that helpful or was it not, right? Because you don't want to introduce change just for the sake of introducing change, especially when there are humans involved, because there are some humans that are more adaptive. They're kind of the early adopters of change, and then some that are not, right? And so you can get, if you introduce too much change too much fast, you can get this, right? Stop. They'll tell you to stop, right? And they'll let you know that they've had enough. So, and then it's just a lather, rinse, repeat process after that. It's iterative so that you can make, again, tiny changes or sweeping changes and then measure the effect of those. Let me give you an example. So
Sure.
you talked about auditing, your endpoints, right? And auditing for events, security events that trigger something that you want to know about, right? So let's say, for example, you say, send me an alert when and a user account gets added to the domain admin. Somebody just got administrative privileges, right? And so if you want to, get an alert, say, send me an email, right? And so as time goes on, over a month, over 2 months, 3 months, you'll say, it's really important for me to know sooner rather than later. I might not see that email for hours, right? Especially if you're a manager or somebody who's in a lot of meetings like we are, right? You might not see that something happened that's really important for a long, long time, right? So unless you're sitting there looking at your email constantly, right, that might be something that is important to know sooner rather than later. So you can change that process to say, send me a text message when that happens, right? That's more important than, Joe putting his password in incorrectly. You know what I mean? So that tiny change increases your incident response time to real time almost, right? So if it's, sending you a text message, you can say, Joe Ray just got added to the domain admins. Wait, what's that about? And especially if you are flowing your workflow for authorization of privileged accounts, through a change management process, for example, you would know, oh, Joe Ray just got added to the domain admins. I knew that was coming. That's no big deal, right? You can ignore that, right? But that's a tiny change that you can implement and, measure the effects of that over time. Similarly, you might want to add transparency to that process and say, instead of sending the email to me, send it to our help desk ticketing system. So it automatically creates a ticket and brings transparency to the process to say, Joe Ray was just added to the domain admins group. That ticket gets created and somebody can then go in there and say, yeah, we knew about that. That was authorized via change 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you could close the ticket. So it was really nothing, right? And so when that happens and it's really something, that transparency and that workflow becomes measurable and a lot more transparent.
And becomes much more important too. And that's an incredible anecdote too, because you've hit on so many different aspects in there, Renita, between iterating and developing a program, having a plan to start from, prioritizing and kind of triaging certain issues as well, and then transparency in the process so that you can measure and analyze and improve better last time. And those are so many different principles of continuous improvement right in there at once, which is incredible. And for business leaders who want to tap into some of those principles as well, I imagine there's certainly some specific methodologies or frameworks, when we're talking about continuous improvement for cybersecurity, that they could look at as a starting point.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of those things that we talked about, or you've talked about specifically on, Live with Lighthouse, is the concept of, monitoring. And that is so important now because, one of the common challenges or threats to an organization is around this concept of something called a 0 day. Right? A 0 day vulnerability is where somebody has actively started to exploit a vulnerability. They figured out how to insert some badness by exploiting a particular vulnerability. And that exploit has no cure. It doesn't have a kill switch. It doesn't have a cure. They haven't created a patch for that. And so one of two things can happen. One is you subscribe to those kind of real-time alerts saying, hey, a vulnerability 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is now actively being exploited. You need to put a process in place that says, okay, help me to understand the residual risk around that, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say it's an Apache vulnerability and you don't have Apache in your environment, or you think you don't, but you don't have Apache in your environment. You can say, well, you know what, that's not a big deal for me. Or, you know what, I'm just going to double check and see and do a scan and see if we have Apache anywhere in our environment. And then I can respond, accordingly. So, one of those, risk variables, if you will, is whether or not it's exposed to the internet. So you can say, yeah, I have Apache, but it's not exposed to the internet. I'm still going to patch it, but not everything has to be a fire drill. And so as you go through that risk ranking, and they're just, I think 4.0 is now out for the common vulnerability. I don't know if you saw that, the CVE risk ranking. It's a way to quantify and qualify risk. As you go through that process, you get better at it. And that's another example of continuous improvement, which is, let's look at these 10 things. And then number 11 is, let's also do a scan and make sure that that thing doesn't exist in our environment. We saw that with the Log4j vulnerability. I don't know if you remember that was actively being exploited. We found, in our environments that there were lots of opportunities to understand where that component lived in our environment and how it was being used. I mean, some of our vendors didn't even know that, we had a certain element of Java in our environment. We reached out and said, hey, what do we need to do about this? And they were like, no, you're fine. But what we realized was like, no, that we're not fine, because that element of Java was in the client. So while it wasn't in the application, it was in the client. And so, that's a perfect example of, applying continuous improvement and kind of challenging the status quo, questioning, the we think we have the answer, but let's take that just a step further.
Exactly. And thinking about that from a continuous improvement perspective, some of our viewers might be a little bit more familiar with certain frameworks like Lean or Agile or Kaizen,
Yeah,
maybe even the NIST framework as well.
right.
How would some of those kind of support a business as they're thinking about vulnerabilities like those?
Yeah, so the concept of continuous improvement is not new, right? It's been around for a while. If you think about even going back to the early days of project management and the PMI methodology, lessons learned is incorporated at the end of the project, right? Which is, what worked, what didn't work, what went well, and then taking what you've already done and then recycling it or repurposing it for a new project, but then making it better. So that's been around for a while. But the Lean, the Kaizen, whatever flavor of continuous improvement, I like to keep it simple and do the plan, do, check, act, or plan, act, check, and then do. Right? It's that lather, rinse, repeat. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it really does have to become part of a culture or a mindset for folks that are participate in that process, right? So that they know, as an organization, as our culture, we are a continuous improvement culture, right? We're going to look at the way that we do things, and if people are uncomfortable in that space, they just need to recognize it, right? Is that it's like I don't want to keep changing all of the time. I want to do things the way that I've always done them. If they're uncomfortable in that space, you have to either retrain them or figure out how to make them comfortable and understand what's in it for me. How does this make my process easier, more efficient, smarter? Because some people are also at the other end of the spectrum, which is, why do we do this every day? It doesn't make any sense, and so they're really wanting to make those changes. So you have to find that really good balance for your culture.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance, and phrasing it as a culture is a great way to think about it too, Renita. Because when we're thinking about something like cybersecurity, there is so much of a human element to it as well. Even going as simple as something like a phishing attack too. All it takes is, in some instances, one employee clicking on a link from an email that they don't realize is malicious, and that's creating a vulnerability right there, something like that.
Right.
So when you have a culture of security and you're thinking about those types of things, it really makes a big difference. So the question there then for me to you becomes, what role does employee training play in building up that culture and keeping your business safe?
Yeah, let me go back to the prior segment of this show that we were talking about, what flavors of continuous improvement. And the NIST honestly baked in that post-incident analysis into the incident response part of it. But it's broader than that, right? As part of the information assurance process, you can build or bake in those kind of quality. It's really about quality, those quality assurance methodologies to say, let's say, for example, you have a policy that restricts the use of USB access, right? Not everybody in the organization needs to have a flash drive and be putting it into their computer, right? But there are some use cases where that is, definitely called for, or certainly the business business processes surrounding that really need that to have access to a USB access. But by and large, the answer is, for our laptops, we want to make sure that, that is restricted. And so from an information assurance standpoint, information assurance is really kind of that check yourself before you wreck yourself methodology, where, you go, look, run me a report on a, periodic basis, whether it's, monthly, quarterly, and show me, the number of people that have the access to, be able to use a USB drive, right? And that really should match something that's been authorized, right? So you kind of could do a stare and compare, or if you're in a larger organization, you can kind of bounce two lists against, up against each other and to say, Joe Ray has access to USB. Somehow that happened and we don't know why or how, but it did. There are humans that are, have the hands on the keyboard, right? It's not all automated. So you can find out before something bad happens that something went sideways, right? And a process got trained or retrained, because you can have dilution in training when you have turnover in employees, right? So somehow that didn't get trained properly, and a couple of people ended up with USB access that didn't have access to it. So those kinds of things, like I mentioned in the NIST, it's baked right into incident response, right? Is to say, what did we learn from that process, and what can we do better? But moving on to the concept of, what role does employee training and awareness play in improvement in cybersecurity? We all know that employees that aren't aware of their cybersecurity responsibilities can inadvertently have unintentional disclosure of data, or they can, accidentally click on a link, or they can become, also there's the risk of becoming numb to the information security awareness, especially if it's, the same old class that you've taken year after year after year, and it hasn't been updated, right? So there can be that numbness or just boredom and fatigue from taking the same old class every year. So keeping it fresh and updated is really important. There's a couple of organizations that have found a fun way to teach cybersecurity. In fact, if you follow the Cybersecurity Hub, it is hysterical how they bring security awareness to light in a really, really funny way. I mean, it's pretty dumb. I swear they have comedians writing content for them, but follow them on LinkedIn, because they're really funny. So, keeping the content fresh is one thing, but also keeping it current. So, one of the things that is relatively new is this concept called malvertising, where they're injecting malicious code into what appears to be legitimate advertising. Right. And so you might have purchased something from a particular, like LL Bean, we'll pick on them, right? You might have, purchased something from them, and that you're going to see a pop-up advertisement for LL Bean, right? You're expecting that because that's what happens, right? And so if, malicious software gets injected into the advertising, first of all, it's really difficult to detect. Like the average user, can't inspect just by looking at it and know that content is in there, that the badness is in there. And so, they're really deceptive in the way that they deliver the bad content. They're difficult to spot, and they're also, delivered on the screen to unsuspecting users, right? And so, but once you click on it, it's really, really hard to get out of it. It takes, hijacks your screen. It does all kinds of bad stuff. You can't even close the window at some point. So, I hate to say it, but it's better to just not even click on the advertisement and go to, if you see something that looks like it's a 20% off coupon or something like that, just go to LL Bean, or I hate to say it, open the flyer that they send you and use the code on the back of the paper, right?
Yeah.
So, but you have to find that right balance between giving enough security awareness on training that people understand what the risks are, but also finding that employees can become overwhelmed by the never-ending stream of cybersecurity alerts that we seem to have to train them on. They can really just be overwhelming. It can actually cause paranoia. Some of a healthy amount of that is good, but too much is just creates anxiety. So
I
don't know what the right answer is as far as that healthy balance, but I guess making it fun it does help.
Yeah, and you can find that healthy balance too, like you were saying, between keeping the content fresh, and you just have to find a way to make it resonate with employees, but also kind of make it part of their daily routine too. And I imagine that that's a pretty collaborative effort too, which actually is a good segue then into we've got a question from a live viewer here. We got Randy Harris chiming in. Thanks Randy for joining live and watching this chat with Renita. Randy wanted to ask you, who at an organization should be involved with creating that culture of security? Seems like it should take a village, but often is left to one or two people to lead and manage.
Yeah, that's a great question, Randy. It's really a commentary on this conversation that needs to be happening at the board level, right? And everyone knows this. If you read any amount of material on culture, they say culture starts at the top, Right. So this has to be a board level conversation. It cannot be, IT is responsible for cybersecurity. It has to start at the top. Let me give you a great example. When we first introduced or started talking about multi-factor authentication, a lot of those conversations were outbound of cybersecurity insurance, right? Cyber liability insurance, where they were now mandating two-factor authentication, right? So it was a little bit of the tail wagging the dog. Hopefully there aren't any cyber underwriters on the call, but it was a little bit of the tail wagging the dog there because folks are being forced into it. And, board members were saying, we have to have our cyber get two-factor authentication, get it right away. But then when, it was exposed to them, they were like, oh, now I have to do an extra step and I have to do one more thing to be able to authenticate. And it was, it was a culture shock to them, I guess, if you will, to say, you have to do one more thing. And to which my response was, listen, guys, it looks like this. That's how hard it is to do two-factor authentication. So we try to make it as easy as possible, right? But I try to make a joke out of it, which is to say, it was harder to clean your contacts than it was to do two-factor. So, but that's the kind of conversation that needs to happen at the top, which is, we are an organization that embraces cybersecurity. And we're going to try to make it as painless as possible, but it is what it is. And, we are, dedicated and committed to protecting the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And
great
like
question,
you said,
Randy. Thank you.
That's a great question. Thanks, Randy. And yeah, it's really got to start from the top, whether, in an enterprise, if it's a CIO or a CISO and other executives, or even in a small and mid-sized business too, thinking where there might just be a CEO or an operations director or someone like that, or a singular director of technology.
Right.
As we start to bring this home here, Renita, maybe just kind of closing on that note of, for the small and mid-sized businesses too, who know they need to invest in these types of solutions and these types of, continuous improvement principles. Do you have any closing advice for those types of people?
Yeah, it's, again, we talk a lot about culture, right? It's the mindset around continuous improvement. It doesn't need to cost any money. Honestly, simple procedural changes can go a long way to protecting the organization. There was a recent hack that I think everyone's talking about where procedurally an administrator imposter, right, called a help desk and said, please reset my password. Procedurally, there should be, if you can support it, a procedure in place where somebody of a higher authority somebody of a lower authority should not be able to reset the password or change the account of somebody of a higher authority, right? Procedurally, if that had been in place, and let's say you're the imposter, Joe, you say, hey, this is Renita, I need my password reset. That help desk operator would then be able to say, that's not right. It's just like the wire transfer story, right? Which is, call you up and say, hey, I need a wire transfer of $1 million. Send it now, right? Right away. The CEO said so, right? The person who does wire transfers would know that's not how we do things, right? And so it can be, those tiny procedural changes that get practiced and get improved over time so that, those kinds of things that you can be more immune to.
Yeah. Awareness of processes goes a long way. And like you said, then it starts with planning before you can get into acting and doing earlier.
Right.
So
right.
Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then,
any other closing thoughts here?
Yeah. One more, continuous improvement thing that I've seen really, really be super helpful has been around the authorization of privileged accounts, right? So the Verizon data breach report that comes out annually talks about the top, reasons that bad actors can get the keys to the kingdom. And number one is credentials. It's like 54%. So if you just spend time there doing continuous improvement around privileged accounts, you will really, really improve your cybersecurity posture and your risk profile, right? So, give it, if, for example, there's a paper process that, somebody writes down, Joe needs to be a domain admin, and that process flows and it's working, give it transparency, build it into your ticketing system so that somebody can go, why did Joe get domain admin privileges? First of all, it was authorized. And number two, there's compensating controls that you can put around that to say, Joe's not a domain admin all day, every day. He's daytime Joe checking his email, and then he's administrative Joe doing exchange work or something like that. So you have the upper and lower cred so that you can protect yourself a little bit better. But those are just some examples, and hopefully they're helpful to some folks.
Yeah, I'm sure they will be. And I know even for myself in my work too, having access to certain programs and supporting our team, being a small business as well. And these are all great points to remember. So thank you so much, Renita.
Thank you. I got a million of them. So, check me out on LinkedIn. If you want to give me a call, I have lots and lots and lots of great examples.
Yeah. As we close out the show here, Renita, I always love to ask our guests a question of, we really started the show in the spirit of one of our core values called Be a Lighthouse, which is all about helping people. So if you have anyone in your work and in your life who's supported you or helped you learn something new lately, would love to give you the floor to give them a shout out.
Well, sure. Thank you. So, again, as I mentioned, I, just became a scrappy startup about a little more than a year ago. And there's been tons of people. There's too many to name, but I will call out one particular organization, that being the folks at Tribal Hub. They have been extremely helpful to me in doing my work and having the courage to venture out on my own. And they keep telling me, you got this. So, I can't give them enough credit for, just standing shoulder to shoulder with me and saying, you got this. So it's
incredible.
Yeah.
Shout out to Tribal Hub there. And if viewers want to get in touch with you and learn more about Second Derivative and your work and keep up with your travels, where's a good place for them to follow you and get in touch?
Sure. Well, you can follow me on LinkedIn, and I put lots of creative out there, or not lots. I would say I regularly post creative about different webinars that I'm doing. But if you want to get a hold of me, I have a virtual 1-800 number. So it's 1-888-990-2476. Do you want to put that in the chat? Or I can do it. Let me do that.
Perfect.
And
there we
that
go.
Is
love it.
Yep. There we go. So you can give me a call that actually just does ring to my phone. There's not a there's not a help desk somewhere in the cloud. It's just rings to my phone.
There we go. And thank you for being a lighthouse too, and guiding people to where they can find solutions and get in touch with you. So
thanks for having me. This was fun. Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. I love talking about continuous improvement and cybersecurity, two of my favorite things.
Incredible. Yeah, we'll have to have you back for more in the new year, but at least for now, thank you so much for joining us, and it was a really great discussion. So thank you so much, Renita.
Thank you, guys. Bye now.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you back here next week.